Might be the most disturbing and controversial book I've ever read. It's called The Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. And no, I'm not here to tell you whether it's real or fake because honestly, I don't know. But here's what I will tell you. If this book is fake, then whoever wrote it was a diabolical genius. And if it's real, then we've been living inside of a playbook that was written over 100 years ago. In either way, that should really scare you. So, this book is supposed to be the leaked minutes of a monumental Zionist meeting that happened sometime around the 1900s. And it outlines the protocols and agenda of the elite goal of world control and domination. And this book has influenced many future anti-Semitic thinkers such as Hitler and Henry Ford. And, before you jump into conclusions, hear me out. No, I'm not trying to promote anti-Semitism. If you've seen my review of the Jewish phenomenon, you already know that I admire Jewish culture very deeply, and especially things like their discipline, their family values, and dominance in business is all something very admirable to me. But what I'm doing here in this review is I'm showing you the parts of this book that really shook me to my core, because it describes our world today a little bit too perfectly. And I want you to be the judge after you hear some of the highlights that I thought were the most notable. Okay, so the first thing that really stuck out to me was Protocol 129. So, it gets into economics. It says, we have set up the aristocracy of money. Each one of these is human weaknesses, is sufficient to paralyze initiative. It's basically saying if you keep people obsessed with money, you don't have to oppress them, that they'll oppress themselves. And, that's kind of exactly where we are. We're overworked, overstimulated, under-rested. We grind like crazy just to survive. And while we're trying to buy time, the game is rigged. So in Protocol 20, for example, it adds this. It says, we shall create an intensified centralization of government. We shall cause depressions. So, that really hit me because if you think about 2008, the subprime meltdown or the COVID of the 2020s and, the student loan crisis or maybe even the Silicon Valley Bank collapsing overnight. And meanwhile, BlackRock is buying entire neighborhoods. Wealth is getting centralized. Everyone else gets crumbs. And, people's debts, it's like unpayable, right? America has over $34 trillion in debt. Student loans is at $1.7 trillion, and you can't even bankrupt out of it. It's like you're stuck for life. So the question is debt just an economic tool, or is it a method of control used by the elites? Okay. Let's talk about Protocol 6.6. It piles on the fact that this enhanced wage will not bring advantage to the workers, as we shall simultaneously cause a rise in the prices of necessities. That's literally what we're living in right now. Wages go up, and then groceries, rent, gas all shoot higher. You feel like you're running faster, but somehow going nowhere. And that's how a majority of people live. Protocol 4.3 talks about replacing God. We shall destroy God, and in his place we shall put arithmetical calculations and material needs. And it's really chilling because I see it happening. God's been replaced by Google. Peace is replaced by productivity. Faith is replaced by follower counts. And it's personal. I had to ask myself, when's the last time I truly sat still in silence with no screen in front of me? They knew that if they could flood your life with noise, that they didn't need to convince you to stop believing in God and that you would just forget to. Right? So let's talk about Protocol 8.3. It's really sinister. It says, we shall place in administrative posts persons who must face criminal charges or disappear if they disobey. And it's basically talking about blackmail. So, ask yourself, how did Epstein get connected to presidents, billionaires, and royalty? Why did he die in a jail cell with no working cameras and no autopsy photos? How many people needed to meet with him before they got into power or politics? What if the reason so many powerful people are compromised is because they're supposed to be? Because when somebody owns your secrets, they own you, basically. And in Protocol 10.5, it's about talking about destroying the family. It says, we shall destroy among the Goyim, which is us. It's actually a synonym for cattle. or I mean, it's another word for cattle, the importance of the family. If you weaken the family, you weaken society. And look at where we are. Fatherless homes are rising, masculinity is mocked, motherhood is rebranded as limiting, hookup culture is like glamorized, and OnlyFans is marketed as female empowerment. So let's talk about Protocol 10.9. It says, when we introduce the poison of liberalism, states have been seized with mortal illness. Now, during the Obama era, we saw a massive wave of cultural liberalism. Marriage equality with homosexuals, gender identity, racial activism, immigration reform. Some of it seemed to have good intentions, justice, inclusion, compassion. But this book suggests that it wasn't necessarily organic. And it suggests that it was engineered fragmentation. Let's call it what it is. Traditional roles questioned. Masculinity ridiculed. Motherhood commercialized. Children raised more by screens than parents. You know, we were told it was liberation, but what if it was actually intentional destabilization instead, right? Because a confused, disconnected population is easier to control. So the question is, was it progress or was it programming? Right? So Protocol 2 is talking about dissolving national borders. It says the political apathy of the Goyim will enable us to erase national boundaries and establish a single global government. And today, that sounds a lot like the Great Reset. You'll own nothing and be happy. World Economic Forum, the HWO mandates, central bank digital currencies, climate lockdowns. Even the idea of sovereignty feels much less and less. And Protocol 13.3 is my favorite. It talks about distractions. It says, we shall distract them with amusements, games, and pastimes. And it's working. Let's look at Netflix, Squid Games, TikTok, fantasy football, award shows. We're entertained to death and we binge on the next distraction. And they're writing the laws and they're writing the future while we're entertained. So maybe that's the reason why they entertain us. Maybe it's to sedate us, right? Now, in Protocol 12.4, it talks about the illusion of media freedom. It says not a single announcement will reach the public without our control. And all our newspapers shall represent every kind of opinion, but all will be puppets in our hands. Now, tell me that's not what we're seeing today. Fox versus CNN, left versus right. It's just different flavors of the same corporate ice cream. Both parties serve the same lobbyists, Big Pharma, Wall Street, defense contractors. And social media, you're not free on there either. The algorithm knows your bias so well and keeps you trapped in a feedback loop. So the question is, do we really have free speech or is it just curated speech? Now, Protocol 14.5 hits on moral decay. It says, we shall forbid Christ. Our philosophers will discuss all the shortcomings of the religions of the Goyim. And then, in countries known as progressive and enlightened, we have created a senseless, filthy, abominable literature. So let's look at culture today. Porn is mainstream. Wholesomeness is cringe. Degeneracy is monetized in music. Being shocked is rewarding, and being modest is just boring. So, you know, we're living in a world where spiritual decay is rebranded as personal freedom. Protocol 10.19 talks about manufactured crises. By the inoculation of diseases, the Goyim shall find no other escape but to take refuge in our sovereignty, it says. So I'm not saying COVID was planned, but maybe I'm saying it was used. You know, small business was collapsed. Big tech exploded. People begged the government for checks. You know, freedom was locked down overnight and fear became policy. So, you know, compliance became a virtue. Now, the question is, did we respond to a crisis or did we walk right into a trap? You know, look, I'm not telling you that this book is 100% true, but I'm also not comfortable calling it fiction either because too much of it feels real. Believe me when I say I'm only scratching the surface to keep this video under 10 minutes or whatever it is. So, you know, as an Asian American, I've never felt personally targeted in racism, but to be called a Goyim, a thing to be managed, manipulated, and exploited like cattle, that's dehumanizing, and it's disturbing. And the scariest part, none of it feels like an exaggeration. So, now I leave it to you. Is this book a forgery? Was it written to deceive or to disclose? Drop a comment. I really want to hear your opinion on this one. And tell me what hit you hardest, but not based on my comments, but based on your reading, okay? Even if this book is fake, it's becoming more real to me every day. And maybe it's not just a book. Maybe it's a mirror. And maybe we should look at it.